Hello, everyone. My name is Lionel Sandner from Pembroke Publishers, and it's great to have you here today to join us on our session with Deanna Pecaski McLennan, the author of Joyful Math. Before we get started, just a couple logistics. If you do have any technical issues, please feel free to just put that at Lionel in the chat, and I'll go offline here and help you with that. If you do have any questions during our session, please feel free to just put them into the chat, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end, and I'll be able to bring some of those questions forward at that time. But with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Deanna Pecaski McLennan. She is an author and educator who is known for building a kindergarten classroom in which math is inseparable from everything students do. And I suspect for many of you, you already have that same passion and are looking for ideas and ways of bringing that alive in your classroom, especially maybe when those classrooms are online, given all the COVID and kind of how 2020 is playing out. I know that in our session today, Deanna will encourage you to create invitations to engage your students with math through art, literacy, and outdoor play. And she will bring that alive with stories from her own classroom. And so I know that today, Deanna will inspire you to be curious about math, take risks, try new approaches, and collaborate with children as co-learners. And so even though you may be at home and in a very strange teaching world over these last few months, the next half hour is kind of your time to hang out with fellow math nerds and educators, I suspect from all grade levels, listening to the stories and ideas that Deanna is going to bring forward for us. So Deanna, welcome. It's great to have you here, and we're looking forward to our session with you today.
Awesome. Thanks, Lionel. I'm so excited to see everybody. I see many names that I recognize. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Deanna. I'm a mom to 3 children. I have a daughter in grade 9, a son in grade 6, and then a son in grade 3. So I know how difficult it can be to wear those many hats. And I thank you so much for finding time to join me tonight. I'm also a kindergarten educator in Ontario. And so in Ontario, we have a 2-year kindergarten program. Children are as young as 3 coming into our classroom, and then they're with us for 2 years until they move on to grade 1. I am an absolutely passionate kindergarten teacher in the public system in Ontario. So again, I'm really pleased to see so many people from Ontario here. Lionel said that I'm an author, and that's true. I love to read and write about kindergarten issues, specifically math and process-based art. And then I also instruct additional qualification courses for educators who are curious about how to become more knowledgeable in math and in kindergarten. I am a social media junkie, and you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram. So looking forward to connecting with you throughout and then after this presentation. My handle's McLennan1977, and I often use the hashtag #JoyfulMath. But I am greatly inspired by Reggio Emilia. I love coding and thinking about screen-free activities that encourage computational thinking in kindergarten. Love process-based art, the messier the better. And of course, many of you know I am a huge math junkie. So just before we get started, I was curious about how you feel about math. So in a minute, Lionel's going to open up the poll, and I would like you to take a look at these pictures and pick the picture that you feel best describes how you feel about math. And I'll give you a minute to do that. So it was interesting because I asked my 3 children which picture they identify with. And believe it or not, even though I love math, all 3 of them picked number 2. So that led to some interesting conversations in our house. I was surprised by that. So I'm seeing right now, oh, many people are picking number 5. That's great. A couple people number 4, which I think is fascinating. And then a lot of people picking number 1 too, which of course looks like the forced happiness, right? I want to like math, but I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. So I have to be honest with you. I did cheat because when I was thinking about how I felt about math, this is the picture that I would have picked. And this is me. This little dog in the party hat is me. As a child, I did love math. But the thing is, as a child growing up in the 80s, I loved math because back then it was rote, it was rigid, and it was predictable. So I knew that if I answered the questions in my little workbook, I would get that big swirly check mark at the top of my page, and nothing pleased me more than pleasing my teacher. So because math was predictable and rote, I was very successful at it. But the older I got, the tougher math got for me. And I started to suffer from imposter complex in the older grades where I just felt like I didn't belong. I didn't know if I was smart enough to be there. And the thing that solidified my negative relationship with math was a grade 12 class where our teachers assigned work and we would come in at the beginning of class. And if our name was on the board, we were expected to put the homework up on the board, whether we volunteered or not. And I still was getting a lot of the math right because I was plugging the numbers into the algorithms. But of course, I couldn't explain why the math was right. And I didn't understand how the math related to me or my world. So if I could get a treat early on in math, I liked it. But I became disillusioned the older I got. When I became an educator, math existed as a subject that I had to teach. So I honored that. I did teach math. Math was an isolated subject in my classroom. In the early grades, we had a math center, but I didn't really see the interconnectedness of math and the rest of the subjects. I remember asking my dad, who was a grade 8 teacher back then, for help understanding some of the math when I was teaching in a grade 5, 6 class. It wasn't really something that was joyful or embedded in rich practice for me. And then something changed. About 8 years ago, I was introduced to the mathematician researchers Sherry Parrish and Joe Bowler. So many of you might have heard of the idea of number talks that Sherry Parrish originated, where children engage in joyful, authentic, open-ended math talks in the classroom, where the focus is the process of the math learning and not so much the product of the math learning. And kids are encouraged to take risks and try new things in those conversations. When I read Joe Bowler's work, Joe Bowler talked about mathematical mindsets and how we're not born as math people. Anybody can be a math person. And really, it's having a growth mindset and rich learning conditions that create successful mathematicians in school. So I was really inspired by that work. It really resonated with me. And then I dug a little bit deeper into what Joe Bowler was talking about. And Joe Bowler spoke about two different kinds of math. And the first math was the math that I experienced as a child, right? It was sort of like by itself, it was dry, it was in isolation, it was either right or wrong. And then Joe Bowler talked about this sort of idea of fun, engaging, living math that exists in the world around us. And I was captivated. I thought, wow, like I wish that I could have experienced math like this as a child. How differently would my life have turned out if I had been really just enamored with math, the same way I was with piano when I was younger. So I really wanted to create this kind of math in my classroom. And it happened at the time that my daughter, who was in grade 3, came off the bus one day and told me that she hated math. She didn't understand a new topic that her teacher had taught. She didn't like being in the class. She felt that she wasn't smart. And so all of those things sort of clicked into an epiphany for me. And I thought, wow, like I want to be a better mathematician myself. I certainly don't want my daughter to grow up not liking math. And I really want the students in my classroom and their families to appreciate math too. So I thought about how can I reframe math in an emergent kindergarten classroom so that it's authentic and meaningful and challenging for kids. And I came up with a number of things that I recognized in my practice that then began to shift my mindset. And I recognized that math is everywhere. It doesn't exist in isolation. It's not something that's on a math shelf or math center, math circles, math books. Really, math happens everywhere. It's cross curricular, it's integrated. And when we recognize that, children will see it everywhere too. I recognize that math can be an organic, beautiful subject. It's not something that lives in textbooks or worksheets. It's something that is living, breathing, glowing. It's everywhere. And when we reframe how we define math, we recognize that beauty in our world. I want math to be connected to children's experiences so that it's authentic and meaningful for them. I want the math that we explore to emerge with their ideas. And then I want to, as the thoughtful educator in the class, link in curriculum and assessment opportunities so that really it's like a dance where sometimes I'm leading and other times I'm following, but we're all working together. I want to engage children in my classroom in meaningful, authentic inquiries that require that they persevere. I want them to struggle a little bit. I want them to engage in that productive disposition. I want them to see meaning in their work and really work hard to uncover those answers. I don't want them to give up. I want kids to not grow distant from those repeated experiences that are negative. I want them to see themselves as authentic mathematicians so that when they move on to subsequent grades, they really feel like they can do it. I also want children to develop into critical consumers, but not producers of information. Or critical producers, not consumers of information. Sorry, my son just let the dog in the room, so I got distracted. I want kids to see that they can build math theory and that they can create the math that exists in our classroom and that they are building theories and following through on explorations and hypotheses together. And then, of course, as a proud Canadian, I recognize that strong math skills equate into a strong workforce later on for our country, because we do want kids to be interested in the math and sciences and pursue those later on after in whatever experiences they have beyond their school years with us. So when I recognized all of these things, I began to look at life through a mathematical lens. And everything that I look at now, I see math. Um, I recognize that math is beautiful and that math can be engaging. And for those of you who are curious about how to further delve into understanding math, especially in nature, a book that I really found meaningful was called The Beauty of Number in Natures by Ian Stewart. And in Ian Stewart's work, he talks about how there's numeracy in everything in nature. The way a horse gallops has a numerical pattern to it. The way a centipede's legs move, they move in a rhythmical pattern. The way sand is swept across the desert when the wind blows results in predictable patterns. So when I read Ian Stewart's work, not only did it inform me as a mathematician, but it gave me the tools to help kids discover that really neat math, especially in the outdoor classroom. So if I had to give some advice, I think that strengthening yourself as a mathematician is definitely helpful. Because in addition to understanding your curriculum, when you understand the math, you can help find those nuggets of learning in what the kids are doing and scaffold and support. But I think it's also okay to not have the answers to everything too, and to co-research together with them and let them know that you are learning even though you are the teacher in the room, and that we are all growing mathematicians no matter what our age. So here are a couple examples of what I mean. These photos were taken in the last several weeks in my outdoor classroom. The kids and I discovered some math just in everyday objects. When we were exploring pumpkins and gourds, they were fascinated by the segments that appeared. So if you look at the top of that pumpkin, it looks like there are fractions there. They recognize that there are textures and shapes that show up, there are patterns in the stem. The intricate way that stem is sort of turned and twirled is very interesting. We noticed that when raindrops fell on leaves in the outside space, they were not spilling over top, and that's because the density of water is allowing it to stick together. The top surface tension keeps water together. So when they examined it from a side perspective, they could see that it was almost like a little half circle, and they were fascinated by the depth of each drop. We also play outside in the rain quite a bit, and so that has been a catalyst for very interesting conversations about circular patterns, especially concentric circles that happen in the puddles. So those are just a few examples of how math can be beautiful and just the math that has emerged in our outdoor classroom. My goal for this workshop, now that I've given you a bit of history about me and where I've come from, is to help you see math not just in your classroom, but in the real world. I'm hoping to help you take math outside of that teacher's guide or that textbook. And I'm hoping to help you disrupt the idea of math as a cold, uncaring subject. I'm hoping to help you see connections in your classroom so that you can have an interconnectedness between subjects or learning areas. And then at the end, I'm hoping to show you some examples of documentation so that you can then help your school, family, and local communities see the rich math learning that's happening with you as well. So the very first thing I'd like to do is talk to you about how I make the environment a place that is very fertile for math learning. In our classroom, as I said earlier, I believe in the Reggio Emilia inspired approach to education. So I believe that the classroom is the third teacher after children's families and then the educators in our space. And a space that empowers children is going to represent them. I want kids to see themselves reflected in the space. I want to create a culturally responsive pedagogy that empowers them and recognizes that they and their families all have knowledge that can enhance our collective exploration in the classroom. I want to exist as a teacher that belongs in a democratic learning space where kids know that they're equals and that their voice matters just as mine. And like Toni Cameron says in her work, I want kids to consider who owns the math. I want the math in the room to be the kids' math. It's not my math, it's not the textbook's math, but it's their math. And I'm the guide in that journey. So when I think about the classroom space, there are a number of ways that I co-create that space together with the children. You can see in the top right-hand corner, that's a picture of a classroom that I taught in a couple years ago. I really believe in the idea of circles and the metaphor of what that shows the community. So I usually try to have our learning carpet in the middle of the room and then have the learning materials around. Children in our classroom are invited to use anything. So even though we do have some designated literacy areas for housekeeping purposes and math shelf and art area, the kids are able to use things however they'd like. So if they feel that there's a math tool that would benefit them in the building center, they can go for it. They can move things around the room. If they find that loose parts are needed in the kitchen because it's serving the purpose of their play, I encourage it. And I'm often asked by educators how I manage that. I think that when you empower children to feel like they truly belong and that the space is their space, they're empowered. They know that you trust that they can use those materials, and the children take care of them. It's one of the reasons why I'm not scared to put fragile materials like glass or beautiful lamps in the classroom, because when you empower kids, they always rise up to the occasion. You'll notice as well on the bottom right-hand corner that we have a co-created number wall in our classroom. So a number of years ago, I stopped using teacher-purchased materials from stores to decorate my space. Once in a while, I'll have some things up there, like you can see that I do have the 10 frame templates, but I really try to build the information on the walls together with the children as we explore. So at the end of the summer, when I'm getting the classroom ready, I'm not decorating the walls for anybody except for the children. I'm not thinking about making the place beautiful because I want to impress my principal or because parents are coming through. I want to send the message to the kids that they're creating this space together with me. And the number example, last year we had a really rich inquiry just before the COVID closures where children were fascinated with how numbers looked and sounded in different languages. So that number wall, I wish I'd taken a picture of it, but that number wall just towards the middle of March had Mandarin numbers on it. There were Arabic numbers. We had children showing numbers in sign language and photos of that up on the wall. We had children attempting to create Braille numbers by putting some loose parts on some cardstock. So that number wall was truly co-created with the children, and the families helped us understand how to represent those numbers in different languages. And then, of course, on the left, I also have some teacher-provided materials that I'm hoping provoke children in thinking a little bit deeper about math. But those are open-ended materials that the children are encouraged to use. I always have an idea in my mind of where I'd like to see things go, especially because I'm thinking about how children develop as mathematicians. There are certain milestones that they do need to have before they can achieve others. But I'm also very curious about how they use them and how I can exist as a play partner in that experience. So those are a few examples of how I help build that third environment with the children, and we create a math learning space. As well, math invitations for us happen everywhere. So in addition to being responsive to the questions and wonderings that kids have, I do put out, and my teaching partner puts out, open-ended materials that the kids can use. So for example, you'll see some pentominoes that were in the outdoor classroom with a safety mirror. When I put those out, I was envisioning the children filling the mirror with them, but they surprised me by filling the perimeter of the mirror, the outside of the mirror, so that they could still see the sky inside the mirror. So they surprised me with that. It was quite challenging. When they were interested in some sunflowers that we saw, I put a dried sunflower head out with the intention that perhaps they would use some fine motor skills to take those seeds out and then maybe be inspired to count how many seeds they pulled out. But instead, what they were doing is they were grouping them by the size of the sunflower seeds. So the ones that were bigger, they were placing in one pile, and the really small ones that hadn't developed yet, they were putting in another pile. And then, of course, I like to give them different math materials to use. And so sometimes I ask them what they'll do with them. And we had a circle one day, a whole group activity where I introduced these large foam dice and I asked for their ideas. How would they use these dice in the outdoor classroom? So inviting that student voice is important. And then just as I've said, co-creating those experiences and then playing together with the children reveals so much math information. So in a minute, well, actually, I think that the chat is open now. I'm going to continue moving ahead with presentation because, as I said to Lionel, I often have a lot to say and I'm cognizant of the time. I want to make sure that I have time left. But if you're inspired to, perhaps as I continue on to the next slide, you could share some ways that you've created a math-rich space in your classroom in the chat, or maybe something that you're thinking of trying that you haven't yet. So I'll invite you to do that. And while you're doing that, I'll move on to my next slide in just a minute. All right, so part of having a rich classroom space that encourages math is also embracing the outdoors. And we like to refer to our yard as the outdoor classroom. I'm really fortunate because I have a very supportive school community and administration that empowers our kindergarten division to spend a lot of time outside. And I'm finding with COVID that's even more important now. So we're outside, rain or shine, at least an hour a day. We ask the children to come to school dressed for the weather, so they will often on rainy days wear splash pants and boots, umbrellas. We presented to our parent council a couple years ago about the importance of the outdoor classroom, and they agreed to purchase a class set of rain boots for us. So children that don't come prepared for the weather have materials available. And then, of course, if it's dangerous weather, we don't go outside. But, you know, I'm trying to help kids recognize that there's no such thing as bad weather, just maybe inappropriate clothing, and just reframing the way we think about the weather. So the outdoor classroom provides a rich, rich learning space for math. And I know that every school and every community is different. And although I'm quite fortunate to have a really beautiful outdoor space, I'd like you to think about your space and think about maybe something that your space offers. I know some schools are located next to very large fields and they're out in rural areas. My children's school is located right next to a horse farm. So my son often talks about watching the horses when he's outside. I know some schools are located by playgrounds, they're in urban areas, they're really interesting places that they can walk. I have colleagues that take their children on the subway for field trips up in the Toronto area. But even something as simple as a puddle in asphalt or on the sidewalk offers so much potential for math learning. And of course, even if you don't have access to a large outdoor space, having a nice window that you can refer to and take a peek at and notice changes happening outside can be really rich. I remember one year we hung a bird feeder outside of our window, and that was such an interesting inquiry for the children. There was so much that they noticed mathematically and nature based, and we didn't have to set a foot outside. So, part of having that rich outdoor space is being prepared for it. And in our classroom, we have a couple wonder wagons. My children are older now, so they don't need wagons. So I've brought my wagons to school. And when we travel outside in the outdoor space, whether it's at the back of the yard near the fence, or in our kindergarten yard, or whether we're in the front landscaping, or maybe we're on a community walk, we bring our wonder wagon. and we will often put literacy and science and math materials in there. So clipboards, writing materials, paper, magnifying glasses, tweezers, collection jars, um, sorting bowls, anything that seems like kids can use it for math purpose is great to have. Sometimes if I know we're going on a walk with a specific goal in mind, like I really want kids to record the numbers that they see in the world around them, I'll choose what I put in that wagon specifically. Other times I'll invite the children to suggest materials. What are you interested in doing today? Or, what did you notice on the way to school? What might we explore when we go outside? So again, just being cognizant of the time. If you're comfortable, in the chat, maybe another discussion prompt for you as I continue to move forward would be, what would you put in your ideal Wonder Wagon? If cost was not an issue, what would you put in there? And then if you don't have access to money to purchase, are there things that you might invite your school community to support you with? I know at our class, about a month ago, we asked parents to send in any old pots and pans that they had because I was really curious to restock our mud kitchen with different things. I wondered how kids would use different sizes of pans. And the parents, they were awesome. They sent all kinds of materials in, and it was really neat because they sent in things that I had never even seen in a kitchen before. I'm not a really good cook, but I was amazed at the wealth of things that children brought in. And then a lot of ownership happened because kids were really proud of what they brought in and they were curious and eager to show each other how those things worked. So in addition to the Wonder Wagon, sometimes I have educator provided invitations that I bring outside as well. Something as simple as a piece of foil can inspire rich discovery. In our classroom, children used a piece of foil a couple weeks ago to explore texture and pattern in the world around them by just pressing the piece of foil onto something textured, like the bricks on the school wall. Other times, putting something interesting out because it's a specific weather day can inspire a lot of conversation. We had a lot of wind a few weeks ago. So my teaching partner and I took some plastic tablecloths from the dollar store and cut them in strips and put them on the fence. And the children noticed patterns as the wind would blow. Those would raise, and then when the wind would stop, they would fall. And then as the wind would blow fast or slow, those strips would dance to the wind. So again, it inspired lots of rich math and science conversation with the children for something that was just so easy to put out. And then, of course, we have a little bit more involved educator invitations. So hoping to get a little bit of dramatic play in the yard. One year we created a pumpkin stand. So again, inviting the community to send in different materials, we put things out hoping that the children would be inspired. And of course they were. They turned that stand into a farmer's market. So even though we purposely didn't give them money, like pretend money, we wanted them to problem solve and brainstorm how they could create sort of that token system. And they found different sizes of leaves on the ground. And the bigger the leaf, the more money it was worth. So giving them sort of an interesting problem and having them own it and figure out the way to solve it is another really interesting way to bring math into the outdoor classroom. Rethinking the way we use things too is interesting. I had some old wooden boards that I had left over from wood floor in the house, and I brought that in one day, and I was so curious to see what the kids would do without any direction from me. And in one day, just 1 hour play, that wood piece became a bridge that a child put between two very solid trunks of a tree. And he problem solved how he could create it so that not only did it fit in there, but he could stand on it and it would support his weight. And those pieces became a car track and a bridge on some stumps for a child to create a path for his car to move. And then the kids were really interested in creating forts to hide behind too. So they balanced and propped those boards up into the different trees so that they could create a fort that they could be hidden within. So again, something as simple as a piece of wood turns into a huge math prop if you give children time and space. And then, of course, being open and responsive to their observations as well. Sometimes some of the neatest inquiries come from what they notice in the yard, whether it's different sizes of sticks that become a bridge for a spider to travel across, or the shadow that light play creates when it filters through leaves, or the interesting spider that we notice through our classroom window and we can observe without getting too close and wonder if it caught two other spiders and ate them, or whether it shed its skin, or whether those spiders lived in that web before it got there. So sometimes the smallest things inspire the richest math and science talk. And going on those nature walks can be really helpful too, because in addition to having the natural stuff show up, kids can notice the interesting math that is man-made as well. So whether it's the array of mailboxes or the symmetry in the grates in the ground, or why we have numbers on fire hydrants and why they increase in number when we continue to pass subsequent fire hydrants. There's opportunity for math everywhere. And I have found too, for those of you who are looking for really rich extensions for families, suggesting things like community walks is a great way for families to become engaged with their children in math talk without having to send home materials. Especially now during the time of COVID, where we have to be aware of what we're sending back and forth, asking families to get outside in nature and take a walk, regardless of what that community looks like, and whether it's urban or rural, really can inspire rich math talk at home as well with families. So another area that I absolutely love to explore in the classroom, as I said earlier in my introduction, is process-based art. And there's that sunflower head that I had shown you earlier where children were picking the seeds out of it. We decided to do some stamping with it. And it just shows you that, again, when you listen to the interests and ideas of children, it's amazing what they ask to do. That created some beautiful prints, if anybody has some dried sunflowers around still. In our classroom, I really focus on process-based art. So it's the experience of creating art that's important to us. Whether or not you have a beautiful finished product is not so much a concern. Obviously, a piece of art at the end that we're proud of and that we can hang up on the wall is nice. But I really like to encourage children to be messy and be engaged and just dive into those materials. And people know I always say that messiness is a sign of hard work in kindergarten. And I go home just as messy as the kids do. So in some of these pictures, you'll see that I took the interest of the children, like those autumn materials that they were exploring outside, and we brought it inside and put it on the art table and then just encouraged them to explore. So some children didn't even paint at that center. They just wanted to sort the materials or look at them with magnifying glasses and talk about the flowers. Others decided to draw and paint still life representations. When I was done with a piece of cardboard, it came in some packing that I had. I brought it to school, and after the children had built with it, they were curious about what it would look like if they painted it. And then once they painted it, of course, they wanted to stamp it. And it inspired a really neat discussion about whether or not the stamp on the paper was a pattern, because some children were stuck on the idea that patterns are linear and they have to go across in a line. Probably because that's the stereotypical example of the pattern that we show, right? Red, blue, and dots. And then others were thinking that this might be a pattern because they could see the repetition in the shapes. And then yet another way that we engage children in process-based art is by rethinking materials in the classroom. So after we noticed that they were really interested in Play-Doh and the feel of the rollers on the table, we invited them to suggest different materials that we could wrap around the rollers. So the elastics, that was my idea, but children suggested all different things: tape and pipe cleaners and beads and foam stickers. And we experimented with what different patterns look like when they were rolled in paint and then pushed across a paper. So art has lots of possibility for rich math talk to emerge, especially when you bring children's art to them. So often I like to use a piece of art as a conversation prompt with kids. I really like to get kids talking about math informally. And so this piece of art was created by a child one day, and he had put the primary colors of paint on a large piece of paper and folded it in half, which a lot of children love to do. And when he opened it, he was amazed by this beautiful creation. So when I took the picture when it was wet, but when it dried, I brought it to our whole group discussion. And I asked kids to talk about what they noticed and wondered about the painting. And they saw different shapes, they saw different colors created. Some thought this looked like a butterfly or a moth. They were talking about the symmetry that they noticed and how they could continue to create different colors, even though we only had the red and the yellow and the blue available. That led to actually to a really interesting discussion about addition sentences, because at the time we were talking about an equal sign and an addition sign. And so kids were creating their own color additions. So that way, if Pierre wanted to create a color that they had created, they could then follow the color equation to know how to get that particular shade. So, I know many people, especially in early childhood, are used to the mess with art, but I'm always surprised by how many families are a little bit art reluctant, or how many of my colleagues in the older grades are a little bit nervous about the mess that an open art area can bring. So, perhaps as I continue to go through the slides, you might bring an example of an art tip or a way that you've sort of coped with the mess of an open art center in your classroom. I know many teachers like to bring art outside, and that's a helpful strategy, especially for controlling the mess. All right, just like art and the outdoor classroom, literacy offers so much potential for math learning as well. And I know at first it might seem like counterintuitive, but really literacy and math go hand in hand. And some of really the really rich inquiries that we've had have been a result of children wondering about problems that they see in books. Today I read Mortimer, and the children were fascinated with how they could clap and stamp a pattern for when Mortimer's mom and dad and 17 brothers and sisters go up and down the stairs, and how the volume of their voices could change to help depict the character in the story. So there are a lot of opportunities for math to emerge in literacy experiences. In our classroom, I do try again, just like I did with the other subjects, to have some teacher invitations. So we have a bird feeder outside of our fence, and I thought that was a great opportunity to put a bird guide up and then just hang a chart like I did with a clipboard. The children have individual clipboards on the fence and see what they did. So it's a way to sort of mathematize the experience of the birds coming to the feeder. A lot of times too, routines like attendance or morning message or figuring out the star of the day, who's our special helper or our special friend, are opportunities for math learning. So I like to depict the helper of the day or the star of the day's name with letter boxes, and the children are quite capable at figuring out the size and the shape and the number of letters now to decode who that person is. And then my goal with this next is maybe to create addition sentences so that we're talking about how many big and small letters are in somebody's name. And then again, of course, that notice and wonder routine where we can either bring a piece of artwork to conversation with children and engage them in those rich oral language opportunities, or maybe bring a picture of them doing something or something they've created in the classroom, like a block structure or a Play-Doh piece, or maybe a photo of them outside on the play equipment, and asking them to notice and name the math that they see in the photo. Some really interesting math inquiries happen in spontaneous literacy moments as well. Last year, my son, during the COVID closures, was working on some alphabet writing, and he was studying symmetry in his math class. And after writing the letters of the alphabet in his notebook, he noticed that there were some letters that were symmetrical, which I thought was fascinating. And so that's a perfect example of how there was math integrated with his literacy experience. Our outdoor classroom has a lot of opportunity for children to mathematize their dramatic play. They like to talk about cooking and figuring out how much food is needed for a certain number of people, what to do if they don't have enough of those natural loose parts to make as much of the stew or soup that they need. Sometimes we'll bring out recipe books and they can read the recipe or maybe write their own recipe. So there are many ways that you can mathematize the dramatic play happening in the classroom. And then, of course, thinking about that Ian Stewart book, The Beauty of Numbers in Nature, when children noticed the tiny snail in the jar there, they were curious about how the little foot on its body could move it so slowly. And they wondered how long it would take for that snail to cross the jar if it started on one side and moved to the other. So that snail I didn't bring to school. The children found it in the yard, but it became a huge opportunity for talking about how we can research snails and get information on what they look like or how they move, and then how we might problem solve that. Like, how would you time a snail to see how long it took for it to move? Like, what would you do if the snail didn't move right away? Like, would you count that as part of your time? Do you wait until it starts? Do you give it a head start? So asking kids to solve those problems can empower them as well in that research process. And then a tip that I often give too is giving each child their own clipboard. So in every classroom that I've had, I've tried to have this sort of clipboard portfolio system where kids get their own clipboard. And sometimes we use the clipboards all at once. So for example, if we're going on a nature walk and we're tracking the numbers that we find, or maybe we're going outside to sketch something that we see, maybe there's a pattern in a flower. Other times children use it during free choice play, so they know that they can incorporate it in their play. So if they need a clipboard to do some writing, if they're writing around the room or they're playing a game, they can use that. And then it also becomes a portfolio system where they can store and then showcase maybe a piece of artwork or a piece of writing or math that they're really proud of. So that has been an excellent system for us. And then the last thing that I'd like to talk to you about is using documentation in the classroom, because when we're not embracing those traditional receipts of learning, like worksheets and notebooks and tests, we still want to make visible the rich learning that's happening in the classroom. I think we really want people to understand that it's the process of math learning that's important, not necessarily getting the right answer or even getting a wrong answer. There's still so much validity in the journey that it took to get to that final state. And using documentation is a way for us to really help make visible what's happening in our classroom. And I think even more so now that we don't have the parent visitors in our classroom space and we don't have the same lens in our practice. And for those of you that are early years educators too, I know that you can empathize with me when I say not everybody appreciates or understands what we do in a play-based environment. I've had even colleagues before make comments about how it must be nice to just play all day. And so I really try to embrace that documentation to not only empower the kids and help them recognize their learning, but demystify this idea that childhood is just playing, like mindless play, like birthday party play. Like we do so much rich stuff in kindergarten, and when people take time to sit and look, it knocks their socks off. They can't believe what kids are talking about. So documentation has really helped me advocate for kindergarten and advocate for math and inquiry and showcase and just honor the stories that the kids have to tell. So a few ideas. When I was talking about outdoor classroom earlier, I was saying that we've really worked hard to help our community understand the rich learning happening outside. So this is outside my classroom right now. So it's my latest documentation panel. And what I've done is I've put up some information there. The text boxes are probably hard for you to read, but they talk about our school improvement plan and our board improvement plan and how what we're doing empowers children in the math vision that's laid out in those plans. And then I have individual learning stories for different experiences that have emerged in the class and the outdoor classroom, so that I'm writing about what the children noticed, what they did, and then what math has emerged in that. So it's a documentation panel in whole, but you can look at each individual piece there and also see a story of a particular moment from a particular day. And then as well, I really like to encourage children to look at pictures of themselves and reflect on the learning that they see. And then when they're ready or with support, they can write about their own learning. I think it's important to help kids reflect upon their math experiences and help share that. Sometimes I will ask them to look at photos as part of our consolidation circles at the end of the day. If I take photos during the day and I'm on the ball that day with my Apple TV, I sometimes will show the photos at the end of the day during a consolidation circle. Other times children offer to share artifacts during our sharing circles, or they put them on display on the classroom shelves. Sometimes I'll bring a table outside in the hallway, and next to the documentation, I'll put the children's actual artifact, because again, I want to really make visible the rich learning that's happening in our classroom. I also really try to embrace that idea from Reggio Emilia that there are hundreds of languages of learning and that math looks different. Sometimes it's just in the experience of using a tangible manipulative. Sometimes it's transient. So in this photo with the sticky notes, the child is figuring out the area of one tile on the floor. But then when the experience is done, those are lifted up and they're gone. So it's just a transient math experience. Other times we use art and pictures to help showcase our understanding. We might use sculpture, we might sing, we might dance, we might move in rhythm. Children learn in hundreds of ways. And when we start accepting that and we stop defaulting to the way we were taught math and we think about math, I think that it helps us in our documentation process. And then the last thing that I have before I end and we open it up to any questions is one last poll for you. I would like you to think about how you might move forward and document children's math learning. So I've given you 4 different examples there, and I'm just curious, what's one strategy that you might try soon? Maybe it's something new that you're thinking about trying, or maybe it's something that you're really comfortable with and you're going to continue to enhance and advance your understanding. So I will invite you to do that. And you'll see that I put social media there because although we want to recognize that children need to have sort of that confidentiality when we're putting things out there on the internet, I found that social media has been a really interesting way to connect with my families. So when I'm looking at your poll results, I'm seeing that, wow, anecdotal photos. So annotating photos with children's words and our interpretation of what's happening is a big chunk there. And then looks like documentation panels the second. Oh, that's 13% for social media. That's great. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. I know that Lionel is going to open it up in a minute. I would really encourage you to connect with me. Like, one of the things that just makes me smile is seeing the amazing math things that happen in Canada and in the US. And I would love to connect with all of you. So please, if you're on Instagram or Twitter, drop me a tweet, send me an Instagram, let's connect. I'd love to know if you try anything new in your classroom or if you discover anything interesting outside. Found Math is a super great hashtag to put on Twitter or to follow. And of course, I've given you my email address there too, Deanna Pecaski McLennan at yahoo.ca, in case you'd like to connect with me. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Deanna. That was great. I know you were busy presenting and couldn't see sort of the running chat that was going on there, but a lot of people taking up your invitations to provide some ideas and sort of reinforce things that you were saying and take it in a further direction. I think I didn't get the name, but I think the winner was on dealing with paint, and the one teacher had the kids mix their own paint and then give it their own name. And I thought that was brilliant as a way of managing paint in the classroom when the
I
kids get
love
to name
that.
their own paint, eh? Yeah. So that was
Yeah.
good.
Oh,
So
yeah.
one of the things I know folks are you can see you're saying thank you in there, but maybe just before we close off, one of the pieces that I sort of took away from your talk is, you were talking about sort of your experiences with math, and then when you realized that and they decide you were going to do it differently and bring it into the classroom, that seemed to charge you. And I think a lot of people that are on here today are in a similar situation, but there was a thread all the way through the talk today about with COVID, it was like it was harder to do. You had to sanitize things.
Yeah.
Maybe you're virtual and you don't get those student interactions. Have you noticed any of those sort of this year being a bit different because of that, and maybe how you've addressed that? Do you have sort of any thoughts on that?
Well, the first thing I have to say is that kids are so resilient, right? I was really worried when I came back in the classroom. I had a lot of anxiety in August thinking about school, especially because I believe so strongly in that play-based, open-ended classroom. So I think that for me, part of it was giving myself permission to let go of what I couldn't control. So I knew that some of the things this year were not going to be normal, and that was okay. And of course, the presentation today focuses on what like a normal classroom would be, right?
Yeah.
The second thing is just rethinking the way I did things. So we're still offering those messy paint and the math manipulative activities, but it's just done in a different way. So instead of having a whole group circle, maybe we're talking individually with students about something, or maybe we're working with small groups. If I have an art invitation out, it's maybe one at a time, and I just have to be a little bit more aware of having enough material so that everybody gets their own. I have really found that if you help kids own the experience and you explain to them why it's important to put your paintbrush in the sink so that the next friend can have their own paintbrush, they'll do that. They're empowered with that. And the outside classroom for me, I think that I've really focused more, like more so than usual, on what can we use in the space around us so that we don't have to bring out a lot of those learning materials. So what's in our yard? What natural loose parts are available? How can we rethink this space so that we can still have that open-ended math, but without that burdening of having to disinfect everything? So I'm traveling
Yeah.
that journey right along with everybody. Every day it seems we're trying something new, of course, based on what our health unit is saying. So
Great. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm just knowing we're coming to the end of our time together here with everyone. There was a question around how to access your book, and on everyone's screen there should be a link there that they can get a code to get $5 off their next purchase at Pembroke Publishers. So please feel free to access that particular link. There were a few sort of just general kind of other kind of technical questions, for lack of a better word. I don't think we really have time to cover those today, but someone mentioned very, very early on, and I didn't mention it, that you have an amazing blog. So I don't know if you want to give a little plug for that before everyone signs off here. But I think that
Yeah.
might be a place that they could reach out to you as well there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's www.mrsmclennan, so MRSMCLENNAN.blogspot.ca. And depending on how busy it is, that blog sometimes doesn't get as much love as it should, but everything's archived. I've got over 1,000 posts on there, and you can
Wow.
click the cloud, the keyword cloud, to get to a specific topic. And you'll notice that at the beginning, years ago when I first started, it was basically just a showcase into the classroom, and it's become much more pedagogical, philosophical, and math based. So I'm really trying to dissect the math that's happening in our room and make visible the rich math that's happening. I just did a blog post last week on the math that was emerging in risky play as children were jumping off of
Cool.
stumps in the backyard. So
I like that. Good. There's some physics in there too. As a physics teacher, I just have to throw that in there. I'll just give you the last word in a moment here. But just before we close, folks, you will get an email from us indicating that this recording has been posted. In there, I'll also include Deanna's blog link as well, so you have it there as well too. But Deanna, on behalf of everyone tonight, this was great. It was so refreshing just to be able to sit down and hear some ideas that you're bringing into your classroom, and then to read the chat and seeing your voice being validated all across North America from teachers who are participating tonight. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with everyone, and the chat sort of scrolling away here with thank yous. And I know that they're all very heartfelt based on your conversations with us today. So I'll pass it over to you just to close us off for the night.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I just love connecting with you. If you have a question specifically, please reach out to me. I love talking to other educators and families and parents, and I look forward to continuing to connect with you and see the amazing things that you're doing. And hopefully soon we can return to that normal classroom and embrace that joyful approach to math again. And I hope that you rethink yourself as a mathematician as well, and recognize that no matter how old you are, you can reconcile those previous negative experiences with math and really grow as a mathematician together with your students. So thanks, Lana. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Good. Have a good evening, everyone. Thanks for
Thank
joining us.
you.